You're listening to the First Fight podcast, home of the people and stories behind the fight. I'm Jennifer Anderson, the host and creator. My goal is to give you a peek into the remarkable world of fighting and create a platform for fighters to tell their stories. In each episode of this series, a different fighter shares a transformative story of their first time. Welcome back, everyone. In this episode, I have a great chat with Josh Thomson. Josh tells us about his first fight experience and the humbling lesson he took away from it. He talks about his transition from being an athlete into a commentator and podcaster, as well as what he sees for the future of MMA and his thoughts on potential fighters union. Thanks again to Josh. I really enjoyed this chat and getting his outlook on everything, and I hope you enjoy it too. So thanks for coming on the show, Josh. I really appreciate it. Tell me a little bit about how you got your start.
So starting in terms of MMA, I was wrestling in college, me and a group of buddies, used to train at this local jiu-jitsu gym up in North Idaho, up by Canada. And we were all wrestling in North Idaho College. And so when we started training during the summer, instead of just spending all the time at the beach, or at the lakes, we'd spend time, in the jiu-jitsu gyms. Some of us learned how to box and kickbox and do a little bit of Muay Thai. This was back in like 97, so the sport was relatively new. So we were just training jiu-jitsu and a gi, during the off season to kind of keep us, learning the grappling flow and the movements. And we really enjoyed it. And so during that time, we were able to kind of sometimes get fights and sometimes not, and just stay busy, and that was just kind of what we were doing. We were trying to, I guess at the time, because it was such a new sport and there was a lot of buzz about it, that we were trying to kind of try to be cool. It was like one of those things like, hey, I train jiu-jitsu. Everyone kind of knew it was a cool thing at the time. Like, train jiu-jitsu. Yeah, I'm doing Muay Thai. Like, it was like slang talk. It was like almost like the cool talk at the time because the UFC had just started and the sport had just started. And during that time, that was like kind of that era of like Frank Shamrock just kind of coming onto the scene. There was a lot of things going on, Tank Abbott and Tito Ortiz. And it was kind of that machismo era of the younger generations of the Tito Ortiz and the Frank Shamrocks being able to walk around with a different type of clout if you train jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai. So that was kind of, I think, what we were looking for.
What made you eventually decide to get in the cage and compete?
So my first fight wasn't in a cage. My first fight was, I showed up, I guess you would almost call it like a smoker. I showed up at a gym, and back then, that's what we called them, smokers later on at other gyms. But back then, that's how fights were made. Like, you just said, hey, there's a fight going on, because there was no internet. So people would just call the gyms locally, that were even in other states. Like, I was in North Idaho, but we fought in Washington for my first fight. But there was kids from Oregon, kids from Montana, kids from Utah that all came to this gym, and they had 400 or 500 people in that gym. It was standing room only. It was a sweat box, and in my car right now, the ceiling was touching people's head like this, and so it was strange. People just called and said, hey, yeah, here's the address. They wrote it down, and they brought a map, and we drove to the gyms that we had to go to compete. And so we just showed up, and if someone was there, and you weren't already matched when you got there. Everyone went. They just weighed in if you were interested in fighting. And you saw the other people weigh in. Everyone weighed in at the same time. You saw the other people that were weighing in, and you said, okay, you're about my size. Let's fight. And you didn't know anything about them. You didn't know if they were a jiu-jitsu guy. You didn't know if they were a kickboxer. You didn't know if they were a boxer. You didn't know if they were a good wrestler. Wrestlers, you kind of could know they had good, like they had cauliflower, or something like that. So you knew they were kind of a wrestler or they were a jiu-jitsu guy. That was all you knew. Like, you didn't know anything about their gyms. You couldn't go on the internet and go, hey, like, whose gym is this, and where do you guys fight? Like, you didn't know any of that stuff. We didn't have that access. There was no YouTube, so you couldn't look up videos of fighters and having their previous fights. And so it just was one of those things. You showed up and you really just, hey, you're about my size. We look like we might be a good matchup. Let's fight. And that's how it was. I paid $25 to fight my first fight. I showed up. I paid. I drove, an hour away. I paid $25, fought, and that's how it all went down.
I mean, is it something that came naturally to you, or were you nervous? I
So,
mean, it's different than wrestling,
no,
obviously.
it's okay. So since I was one of the closer gyms that went to this event, and I'm going to tell you this story of like my first fight, is I was only about an hour away where our gym was, and there was a bunch of us that fought on that same card. But I would consider myself like one of the more local guys. I was wrestling in college there. I went to high school in that community, like kind of in near that community. People knew who I was, and I'd had some street fights, and and I'd had some fights in college. So I was telling everybody, come watch me fight, da 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 da. I'm gonna beat this guy. I'm gonna knock him out. I'm gonna hit him with the head kick. I've been training Muay Thai for like 6 months. So I thought I was like a true like Muay Thai guy. I was a badass on the feet. Forget my wrestling, screw my jiu-jitsu, all the things that I knew I was good at, screw it. I'm a Muay Thai guy. So I go out there and, and I'm fighting this guy and we're having a good go. And he was like a shorter, stockier guy. And apparently he was a bull rider. I talked to him afterwards. He was like a bull rider from Utah area. Strong legs. Shorter guy, but stocky, real stocky. And I'm out there, and because it was 1 round, 10-minute round. There's no rounds. It was just 1 round. It was 10 minutes. And so I'm out there, mouthpiece, no cup. I have no cup on, and I'm wearing like bad boy shorts because those were the thing back then. The cool shit. So I go and buy myself some bad boy shorts, and I'm out there. So I'm leg kicking him like crazy, boom, boom, boom. And I'm beating him up. And his leg's battered. Like, he's having to switch stances. He can barely kind of come forward. This ring that we're fighting in, the ring is only, I would say, if we were both in opposite sides of the corner and we both took 1 step out, we're in the middle of the ring. So there was no way of running from each other. There was no, there was no way of escaping. Like, this was it. Like, if people, I don't know if you recall, and maybe Corey can recall, or you guys pull up video of the old King of the Cage. Yeah. It was only, I want to say it was only 12 feet across originally, 12 or 14 feet across. So you took 1 or 1.5 steps out, and you guys were both there in the middle of the cage. It was it. Like, that was it. And so that's kind of what happened in this one. I think the whole cage was the whole ring was maybe 12 feet across or 14 feet across, if that. It was tiny.
No running.
And so we step out, and I'm leg kicking, I'm out boxing him, I'm foot sweeping him and taking him down at will. I'm doing all these things, right? And so I had told all my friends there's this clack clack for a minute. Normally it's 10 seconds, but this is way back when they thought they were trying to reinvent the rules. So they're at 1 minute. The guy yells out 1 minute. I hear clack clack, and I'm on top of him right now doing some ground and pound hits over him, and we're getting after it. But I'm getting a little bit tired. It's 1 long 10-minute round, and so I tell all my friends for weeks that I'm going to knock this kid out with a head kick. So I back up. And I start kicking his legs. I say, get up, get up. So I let him up with 1 minute left. And I'm throwing the headphone on my back with the reverted triangle choke. So he slides into a choke, and I'm stuck. And I'm thinking to myself, this is not how it's supposed to go. What the fuck is going on? So I swear, he's on my back. I start to tripod up, and he slides off. And I was telling you about earlier, he was a bull rider. He got his legs locked around in a triangle, and I was just stuck. There was no way, and obviously it was my first fight. A lot of nerves had gotten to me, not in terms of like performance-wise, but in terms of like my conditioning. I thought I was in better shape, and I was exhausted already. I was tired. He slipped on that inverted triangle, and once he put the squeeze on me with the triangle, I was done. I was tapping. So I lost my first fight. It's like a fight you paid to fight, so you don't really count it on your record. But it was still my very first fight ever, in terms of, that was being sanctioned or not, whatever it was, having rules and refs and all this other stuff. So it was very upsetting, man. I took about a year off after that. I mean, I still trained, but I got offered some other fights. I was like, nah. It was more of a reality check for myself. Went through the wrestling season, wrestled in North Idaho, and then I got done with that. And I was, and then, about a month into summer, I ended up taking another fight, the following year. That was a lot better, worked out. And then ever since then, that was kind of like the rejuvenating force of what got me back into the sport. It took a lot for me to swallow what I did, and to make the biggest mistake of my life. That was one of the biggest mistakes I've ever made in my life. Like, I had let my ego get so big that I was beating somebody up so bad that I remembered that I had told all my friends that I was going to knock him out with a head kick. And I got up off of him and let him up. And the arrogance of myself, just I threw the head kick, slipped. He jumped on my back to choke me, and I tripoded him up over real quick. And he slid down into like an armbar position almost, and he locked his legs in that triangle, and I was done. I was like, shit. It was on tight. It was on quick, and I tried to wiggle out of there as much as I could, being a little bit tired, a little bit gassed. There was no escape, man. I was done. Biggest learning, one of the biggest life, not just life lessons, but I mean learning lessons, but it was also a life lesson for me. It just, it was like you can't take anyone for granted. You can't leave any, you can't play those games, in any type of sport. And it was great, man. It was great for me to realize that.
Now, when you took that time off, did you take it off to get better, or did you take it off because you weren't sure if fighting is what you wanted to do?
I wasn't sure if fighting was what I wanted to do. I did it just really, the first one was more like for fun. But I was always, and I mean, I'm not trying to sound arrogant, but I wasn't always the best at everything, but I was never really the worst either. I mean, unless it was basketball, I was never really good at basketball. So it was just, I was never good at basketball. But it was like, I did well in baseball. I did okay in football. I kind of struggled a little bit more on football, but I did well in baseball, tennis, swimming, diving, all these other things, wrestling, soccer. I mean, soccer and wrestling were my two that I did the most. I was successful in both. So I got the fighting, but fighting was like more of a natural thing to me. I really loved fighting. Fighting also had that direct relation to wrestling, because you use the wrestling. I felt like I wasn't wasting I wasn't wasting what I had done for so many years in using wrestling and fighting. Yeah. And so I committed my life since I was like 3 to 5 years old in wrestling. I could take that and transition it into fighting. And then the other thing as well, like soccer to me was one of those things that a lot of fighters, they have a hard time really focusing on what's one of the most important parts of fighting, which is cardio. And soccer gave me that natural just push and that desire to go run. Like I loved running. I mean, I loved it. It was that intensity of like, if I don't get to that soccer ball before that other person does, we get scored on and we can lose. And that's a team letdown thing. So for me, throughout my career, running was, I'd run anywhere between 25 to 30 miles a week easily, and so I love running. And so I think those two things helped me a lot, mainly in my life in terms of the sport of fighting. And so I didn't know if that was what I wanted to do, but I knew that I didn't want to waste those two things that I knew I was really good at, and the desire that I had to be a fighter. I loved fighting at nightclubs like an idiot for free, and I loved the adrenaline rush of fighting someone knowing that there was no ref, but I also knew that I was a better wrestler than 99% of the people out there that were at a bar, drunk, by the way, and I was also probably more of an athlete than all those guys. And so now that I'm older, I look back and I'm like, man, you are a real asshole. That kind of feeling, but it's true. It's like, when you're young, you wish you could go back and just tell yourself a couple things, and it would make a huge difference in the rest of your life. And so, but I think for me, fighting it came at the right time. And when people say that you're blessed with something, like I feel like I was blessed this sport came at the right time in my life. I was at that age. I was 20, I was 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. And then, I got signed to the UFC when I was 21 years old. I didn't fight for them until I was 22. But that younger part of my life, had that sport not have been around, I probably still would have been at the local bar fighting, picking fights with people, or, chasing tail, or doing whatever it is, and it wouldn't have been good. It would have been completely different. Fighting really gave me a focus after wrestling in college, after playing sports. I still play indoor soccer and a little bit of, club soccer, for old people, but it's the desire, I think, to be competitive. Randy Couture talked about this after he got in wrestling in the Olympics, and competing for the Olympics, is that he's like, look, I had that itch, that desire that I still wanted to compete. And that's exactly what I was going through. I was like, hey, look, I know I'm not going to wrestle forever. I wasn't good enough to wrestle in the Olympics. I didn't want to go to Colorado to wrestle at the Olympic Training Center, because I knew those kids were studs, man. They were all the best in the world. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, I had no desire to do that. And so I was like, okay, once wrestling's done in college, what are you going to do? And so fighting came at the right time. I had the desire to keep training, keep working, and and take shitty ass jobs so I could make it work around my training schedule. And then in the following year came after that, I trained all I wrestled all summer. All winter. And I played soccer in the fall, played soccer in the spring, and then I was in shape and I got back into training jiu-jitsu. I was still training jiu-jitsu, periodically, because you're not allowed to train jiu-jitsu during wrestling season, because if you get injured during that, you could lose, scholarship, you could lose money, you could do, all those things. So I just trained jiu-jitsu when I wasn't wrestling, and soccer was for fun and club and all this other stuff. I was on a traveling team, so I trained jiu-jitsu while I was playing soccer. And right after soccer season got done in the spring, I took, I was back in the gym full time, and we just randomly got a call. Hey, we're looking for this guy. We're looking for someone to fight this guy. And I had seen him fight the year before when I was down in Boise, Idaho. I had seen him fight the year before, and he was smaller than me. He was I think he was 10 pounds smaller than me, but he was a really good jiu-jitsu black belt. And he was under Hicks. I want to say he was under Hicks and Machado. He was under Hicks and Gracie, but he was he had trained with this guy named Lowell Anderson, who also fought in the UFC. And Lowell was a black belt under Hickson as well. So those guys, they had kind of trained all together, and they were good jiu-jitsu guys. They were like levels above me in jiu-jitsu, but they had no wrestling. And so, I was like, yeah, sure, I'll take the fight. And they paid me. They paid me $150 a fight. And at the time, that was a lot of money to me. I had no money. I was broke. I was a college kid, making, I was like, prepping. I was doing prep cook at a restaurant, making, $250 a week, working, 15, I was working probably 25 hours a week, making only $250 a week. It was horrible. And so, but it worked around my training schedule and what I wanted to do. So I was like, all right, well, what am I doing? So I took the fight, down in Boise. And that was a year later. And I was like, okay, you got to figure this out. So I went out there, and 2.5 minutes in, was able to finish him, knock him out. He couldn't take me down, backed out of his guard, fought a smarter fight. Backed out of his guard, lots of ground and pound, backed out every time he attempted a submission. Just vicious, like a lot of intensity, stuffing his takedowns, getting on his head. Just a lot of just being dirty and nasty, like in terms of like high-level wrestling, of just being aggressive. And he just wasn't ready for that. Top-level jiu-jitsu guys just weren't ready for that type of tenacity when it came to wrestlers. Just the viciousness of it all. They wanted you to fall into their guard and play the guard game. And some wrestlers were, did that. But I had trained jiu-jitsu long enough to know I don't want to be in this guy's guard. It'd been a year and a half for me training jiu-jitsu. So I knew that, I wasn't a blue belt yet. I was still a white belt, but I knew that he couldn't take me down. I knew I was stronger than him. I knew I was a better striker than him. So I fought a lot smarter fights. So during that year off, I learned a lot in terms of myself, saying, the arrogance got you the first time. Don't let it happen again. And I also think that it helped a lot that no one was around that knew me, except for my corners. I went to a different location. I fought. Sure, Boise was still in the same state of Idaho where I was. But I didn't even tell people I was going. We got the call 2 weeks before I took the fight, like 10 days before, and we showed up down there and we fought. And I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I told my dad that was it. I said, yeah, I'm going to go down to Boise. I'm going to fight. I'm going to make about $150. They're going to pay for all my expenses, hotel, airfare, and some food. I go, so, he's like, okay, be careful. Just be, he's like, you want me to go? I'm like, no, let me do this by myself. And so I went by myself, went with my coaches, and that was it. So it was a big difference from the first time and the second time, and then after the second time, I realized that as long as you keep your attitude in check, that you'll be successful. So as long as that happens, then, that's something I think for a young kid, that's hard to talk to yourself about, yeah. And I did. I had to let myself know that, I had to do that. I was only 19 years old at the time.
Yeah.
So I figured that out.
You need that, like, bravado, I think. I've talked about this before, where it's hard to find a balance between confidence and, knowledge of your abilities as well. Finding that balance, I think, if you can, you'll be successful. But martial arts, is extremely humbling. So you gotta kind of keep it in check.
It's not just martial arts. I think it's anytime you're engaged in a one-on-one sport, whether it's wrestling, whether it's tennis, there's a lot that you learn about yourself when you compete in a one-on-one sport, because you have no one else to blame but yourself. And I see a lot of these fighters that, they come after a loss, they want to blame their coaches, they want to blame their corners, they want to blame the cut guy, they want to blame their training partners or whatever it was. But at the end of the day, you're the one that's in there that has the final say in what goes on, and you got to make those adjustments as you go. And I think for yourself and for me in that first fight, It was a huge reality check for me. Like, just, hey, you need to come to grips with your ego got the better of you to show off to your friends at somebody else's demise. That was the other thing, is I had to tell myself, you were willing to go out there and try and embarrass somebody because you were telling everyone else you were going to embarrass them. And so you had to do it because you said that you were going to embarrass them the way you were going to embarrass them. Instead of just letting it happen naturally. Like, the fight game is the fight game. And if I would have went out there and just head kicked them naturally, everyone would be like, oh, wow, no big deal. Like, oh, shit, that's great. But the fact that I had told everyone that I was going to do it, that I felt like I had to live up to it, that I had to really make an example out of this guy and embarrass him in front of everyone, it backfired. And it was one of those things that, like, I was trying to make him look bad. Normally we try to make him look bad. We try to do it in the fact that this is the fight game. That's what happens, but I let the ego part of me get to me that said, hey, I'm going to go out there and do it. And it backfired and worked against me. And that was a conversation I had to have with myself.
Yeah.
And not just once. I had that conversation with myself several times, just sitting around going, man, you fucked up, and a little bit of that twinkle in me just said, that was kind of your, if anyone was ever going to call you a piece of shit, that was a piece of shit moment. You're not that person, And so, and that's the thing. That's a hard pill to swallow. I think it's for someone who's 19 years old. Like, you tried to be a piece of shit. It didn't work out. That's, to me, that God's trying to tell you something like, you're not a piece of shit, man. Don't be that way, because that's not you.
Yeah.
And that was a reality check to me. That was a reality check for me. And I think it carried me a long way throughout my career.
Well, it's good you had that, reflection and thought about it. Some people might ignore it completely, but
yeah,
when you're fighting, you're putting yourself in this extreme situation, and you find pieces of yourself, you find parts of yourself, and sometimes you don't like what you see, and that's what's really cool about fighting, but that's what's also hard about it, is that you have to kind of swallow those pills and make those changes in yourself. So
yeah,
at least, you had that, at least you learned that at the beginning of your career instead of further along the line.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I had it again later on when I was in the UFC. I was fighting Yves Edwards, same thing. It wasn't so much that I was more upset with the UFC at the time, because they had told us it was going to be for the UFC title. And they were debating on whether they're going to keep the division. So I went out there and said, hey, well, if I put on a good show and showcase why they should keep it, then, and do things that, they've never seen before, that they would probably they'd be interested in maybe pushing more to keep the division. And I went out there and was like talking to like the fighters in the crowd while I was fighting. I had Ease press against the fence, lifting him double leg, pointing at the corners, talking to Matt Hughes and Jens Pulver that were sitting front row while I'm, having press up against the fence, kneeing him and elbowing him and talking, like little things like that, ended up backfiring again. And it was that was another reality check of, hey, you did this to yourself. And you had to go back and just say, hey, this is what happened in your first fight ever. This is what happened now when you're fighting one of the toughest guys in the world. We were both ranked. I was ranked number 1 in the world at the time. He was ranked number 2. And here I am showboating. So those type of fights are the ones that you think like you should be directly focused on your opponent, and I wasn't. It was like super upsetting. But and throughout your career, and that was the last time that really ever happened to me, that I did that again. But it was a good reminder of like, hey, you can't let this shit slide anymore.
Well, it's you're not playing fighting, and you can really get hurt if you're not 100% there. And I mean, Corey has kind of experienced that too, feeling the pressure to be a certain type of fighter and be flashier and, prove a point. Like, I can strike too. And I'm like, you're such a dominant wrestler. Why would you use your advantage, And, he's learned that lesson the hard way of trying to be something he's not, or having that in the back of his head, instead of just getting it done. And it's hard because it's not just sport, it's entertainment. So you have to sell tickets too, but I'd rather win.
Here's the thing is, I understand that, probably more than anybody. But I mean, the bottom line is, and I tell this to everybody, is that winning solves everything. The more you win, you can't be denied. And
Yeah.
doesn't matter which promotion you're in. It doesn't matter if you won a bunch of boring ass fights. Guess what? They can't deny you forever if you just keep winning. You know, Khabib he was considered one of the most, I think he's probably the most dominant fighter that's ever existed, but he was not always the most exciting.
Yeah.
But you can't deny him what he deserved, which was the title shot after all those years, because he was so dominant. You know, there's that. And then the guys like GSP made his rise after he got knocked out by Matt Serra because he was trying to stand and he got clipped. And then after that, he became a wrestler. And all he did was take people down and dominate them and control them and position them and, you know, submit them or whatever it was. But he was no longer a stand-up guy like he was beforehand. And so, and he became champion, became one of the most successful guys in the world. You just got to keep winning, you know, and don't let all that other stuff get to you. And that's hard for young fighters to understand. And, you know, with Corey, in terms of, being one of the more dominant wrestlers, it's okay to use your stand-up. I think there's a misconception that, like, he shouldn't use his stand-up. But no, you use your stand-up. Like, Khabib used his stand-up. Look, he dropped Conor McGregor. But he only used his stand-up to set up his takedowns. His stand-up was never something to go out there and just let's wing it and get after it and, like, let's go through some exchanges and I'm going to show you I'm the boss. No. His stand-up was used directly to get you to exchange. And as soon as you exchange with him, he would take you down. And there's a difference. The fighters that fight with that type of mentality have a longer career, which means you make more money. That's one. And you also will almost 99% of the time have a more successful career. So I don't see any negatives on fighting that style of fight because you'll have a longer career, which generates more money over time. And the longer career you have, the more chance and opportunity you have of falling into a position like I was able to fall into with Bellator, is becoming an analyst, becoming someone that your promotion has had, you were around forever. So they knew that you were successful and people know you and that people respect you and people want to hear your opinion on things. And that's the other thing, is making sure that your longevity in the sport is there as well as the amount of money you make, because without longevity in the sport, the less money you make. You know, and so then you have to find something else to do. Who the hell wants to do that? Hell no.
No, you're 100% right. So what made you eventually walk away from competing and transitioning into commentary and podcasting? And
well, they offered me a full-time job, and I said, okay, like, you know, let me know, like, give me a number of shows that I'm going to do, you know, per month, and give me an idea of what I'll be making, and, you know, we'll go from there. I mean, I still had 4 fights left on my contract. I left a lot of money on the table. If you guys can guarantee me you're going to put me to, say, this amount of fights, you know, or this amount of shows per year, I mean, I'd be willing to walk away, because they would have had to pay me a lot. And I could have went out there and gave half-ass fights, which I didn't want to, which I wasn't gonna. But, I mean, I had to make them think that I was. You know, that I just didn't have any interest in, you know, continuing to fight. It wasn't in me anymore. The younger kids were just faster and stronger, and they were all getting better, and it wasn't for me anymore. And so I loved the sport, don't get me wrong. But it really just came down to, you know, my podcast was growing. It was becoming successful. Things were good. You know, they signed me to a long-term deal. Those two things, you know, and then I've got multiple gyms here in the Bay Area and in California that I have to take care of, you know, so I've got a martial arts gym and I have a fitness gym. And so I got my hands full. I've gotten pretty stacked and busy with a lot of different stuff. So as long as I have money coming in, I mean, and I live a very humble life, I guess you could say, you know, but I don't spend beyond my means. That's the thing. So I just had to make sure that I make enough to take care of myself.
Yeah. Now, initially, when you were in the midst of your career, what did you foresee for yourself after fighting? Is this what you saw, or No,
I didn't see that. You know, I started the podcast and it was doing well. I was making decent, like, you know, a little bit of money, not great, but it was still money coming in. And, you know, my gyms were making me, you know, a pretty decent amount of money. I had a huge kids program in jiu-jitsu. I had over 100 kids, you know, just in my kids program, you know, and then I had it, you know, and then my adults program had about 60 to 70, you know, adults, you know, 50 to 60. Then I had a fitness program that had a little bit over 100 people in there as well. You know, so, and it was a small location of 6,000 square feet, a little bit bigger than that, 6,200 or something. But I was making good money. So monthly I was grossing pretty good money. And then the podcast was making me a little bit of money. And, you know, people would hit me up for privates all the time. I charged an extreme amount of money for privates because I don't like to do them. And people would pay them. And so whether it was jiu-jitsu or it was kickboxing or even if it was just fitness, I mean, I was charging $400 an hour and people were paying it. And sometimes they'd pay for, you know, a month at a time. And it just was like, okay. But I also live in one of the most expensive places in the United States, in Silicon Valley. Yeah. And so money here is not really like a big deal to people. It's like, okay. So when I say, hey, they say, hey, I want to get 10 lessons from you. I'm like, yeah, it costs you $4,000. They're like, okay, here. I'm like, okay, you got to use all 10 in 1 month. Okay, no problem. Like they don't care.
What do you see for the future of the sport right now, the direction it's going in?
The future of the sport right now, it's on the rise. There's a lot of things that can be done, I think, right now in terms of they've got to. It's hard. Look, I guess for me, it's hard for me to say what the UFC should do and what Bellator should do because that's not my job.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But when it comes down to it, there's going to come a time where the fighter's going to have to speak up about pay. Now, look, I'm not far to the other side like some of these other people, some of these other media sources are. They keep making a push that the fighter should get 50% of the pie and this and that. I'm not into that. I'm not into that fully. Look, I'm not saying that they don't deserve their fair, a better portion of the pie. But right now, I think the UFC is paying them like 16%. I think they get 16% of the pie, maybe 17. It should be at about 22 to 20. Like, I think if they're going to make a step up, it's got to be up to about 20 to 22. Mm-hmm. Let's do this in small portions because it's going to take any business. Doesn't matter if it's just the UFC or if it's any other business in the world. It's going to take time to get them there, and you're going to have to say, hey, let's give them 20-something% right now. And then in 4 or 5 or 6 years, let's revisit this and talk about where the revenue is, and what we can afford to give them more of. And look, and it's not just always about giving the fighters more pay. Sometimes it's about doing other things. Let's offer them full coverage insurance. Now, look, they do offer them insurance, but they don't offer them full coverage. What they offer them is a major injury policy, and so it does help. Don't get me wrong. It helps a lot. I've had 2 surgeries with them, based on, that getting hurt in training.
Yeah.
And it helped a lot, so, I paid a $1,500 deductible and I had a $40,000 surgery. I had 2 of them. And so it does pay off. It does. But if you can offer them, medical for real, that would probably go a long ways as well. Mm-hmm. If you can start putting money into a pension plan, something like that for them, then that's something on the backside of their career that they could potentially tap into. That's another thing. Like, it doesn't always have to be about the money they make right at that moment. Yeah. I think it needs to start having. I think there needs to be more focus on the things that will help them after they're done fighting. So that's something. Yeah, stability after that. And I've said this forever in terms of fighters need to start focusing more on not so much how much money they make right now. That has to do with you on learning how to budget your money, okay, and how you spend your money and what you want to do. How about you guys focus on things that will help you after, a 401k or some sort of IRA, some sort of like putting your money into something that you guys can tap into later on when you're done fighting. Some sort of insurance to help cut. Like a full-time insurance that will help cover whatever medical expenses you have from training that are not something that you're going to use a $1,500 deductible for. Mm-hmm. Those are the types of things, that they should be focusing on. A lot of fighters have moved to Vegas because of the Sports Institute or the PSI, the Performance Institute, because they get free food there. They get treatments there. A lot of fighters can just live off of whatever the food is that's there as long as they're under UFC contract, which is smart. That cuts a lot of your expenses because you're going to eat healthy, if you want to go there and eat.
It's hard. It's like a different business model, obviously, than other sports, but I feel like in the culture, too, where fighters aren't going to get what they want because there's always a fighter that's willing to take less, and step up and take the fight. It's kind of like part of that whole fighter mindset, mm-hmm. but I see a change in that coming. I see more fighters going to other promotions and more people being vocal about it, and I guess valuing themselves and expecting to be paid more as a professional athlete. I think it's the hardest professional sport you could do physically. So hopefully it goes in that direction.
Yeah, I think. In terms of them ever having a union, I doubt it. Yeah, that's my only. It's like you said, and I've said this a bunch of times as well, is that there will always be a fighter that will come along and take less money. And here's the thing: is when you put them in, you can put any fighter into the UFC, and with the amount of promoting power that the UFC puts into the promoting dollars they put behind these athletes, they all of a sudden become stars, you know? And so when they become stars, it doesn't matter. I can sell that fighter to you, whether he's a good fighter or not. I can make you believe he is with their promoting dollars. Because a lot of the fighters that they have on their roster, they're no better than any of the other ones that are in any of the smaller promotions that are not even in the I'm talking like small promotions, King of the Cage, LFA. Yeah. They can make those fighters sound like they're great, and that this, you know, and they're ready to be there, and they can get the casuals and the fans to buy into it because it's the UFC saying it, and that's the problem. And so for fighters, I don't think there'll ever be a union, because that's what happens. The UFC knows that they don't need to sell the best fighters to you. They just need to make you believe that they're the best fighters, and their marketing power behind them does that. And so that puts a snag into what goes on with a union potentially ever happening. Now, them getting things like 401ks and retirement stuff put aside for all fighters, they might have a better chance of doing something like that. More insurance, you know, maybe, I don't know, an expense, maybe monthly, maybe like a monthly expense for food. I don't know, something like that. Those are all things that I could potentially see them doing, because all that does for the UFC is helps promote them in a healthy way. You know what I mean? So let's just say it makes the UFC look better as a business, and it also gives a little bit of stability to the fighters afterwards.
Yeah, and takes a little bit of the heat off the UFC.
Oh yeah, it'll calm it down. It'll calm it down until somebody else comes up with something to bitch about. You know.
Well, Josh, thank you so much for taking the time. You're a straight shooter. I look forward to seeing you in your podcasts, commentary. I'm sure we'll see you around now that we can actually go to the fights, hopefully. So.
Yep.
Best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much. And then, just let me know if there's anything else later on that you want to do as well. Hit me up anytime, all right?
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Of course. No problem at all. I'll talk soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again to Josh for taking the time to let me interview him and chat about MMA. I really enjoyed it. You can listen to Josh's podcast, Weighing In, with John McCarthy, and you'll definitely be seeing Josh on Showtime with Bellator doing their commentary. So thanks again, Josh. Everyone else, you can listen to all my past episodes that are archived at firstfightpodcast.com, and you can check us out on Instagram to stay updated in all our upcoming episodes as well at The First Fight. And thanks again, everyone, for listening. We'll be back in a couple weeks with a new interview.